Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
The Urban Fae, The Geas, Part 4, by Bear Lair 64, Michael Lockhart. The Mactier Moor lowered his voice. Wolfling, you are talking more than usual. Nervous chatter is out of character for you. Don't worry. Your love is safe for now, according to your own vision. I will help you when the time comes, and between the two of us, we can take out the mortal trap. He held up a hand. I know they are a threat, and can certainly harm or even kill us. Yet, from what you've told me, this Sony and his crew are not true warriors, or even soldiers. There are others nearby who would pose more danger should they choose. Besides, as you surmised, it may all be a trap. I looked at him sidelong. Apparently, I'm not the only one who chatters when he's nervous. He swallowed his retort since we'd reached hailing distance from the pile of animated excrement gathered at the front of the club. Biggie S? Sony here. We got business to discuss. You'll want to hear from me. I chucked my chin respectfully to show that while I intended to be polite, I wasn't going to take crap from him or anyone else. Coyote, you show up at some funny times. Things is bad. We could use you soon. You showing up here might put you on our side, if not on crew. He rumbled, as only a true large specimen of humanity could, like an elephant. We'd never spoken much, but the big dude seemed righteous enough, turd or no. I enjoyed the moment. It was rare to see anyone loom as well as my grandfather. The two massive men were of a size, though Biggie S has gone to gut and butt with age. I gave a sidewise twitch of my head to indicate the Mactier Moor. This is Big Mac, my new employer. I wanted to let Biggie's arse know that my services were now committed, and not to his silly boss. It was also fun to use a ridiculous cognomen. He grunted and led us into the interior. The soft thumping of bass we'd heard from the outside became a storm of throbbing, skull-rattling misery when we entered. Through the glamour, I could see Grandpa stiffen and frown in disapproval. I, of course, enjoyed seeing my elder discomforted, the only real purpose of the highest volume settings. He should visit Mundania more often, I thought uncharitably. Needs to update on the cultural norms. Just before we entered Sony's sanctuary, I gave the big man a brief, wolfish smile that was open to his interpretation. Sony sat in his imperial glory. That is to say, leaned back in his stupid office chair with the two big wings. His fingers steepled in a bad imitation of a Bond villain. The two dark lenses of his glasses could not entirely hide his expression. He was worried, and likely not about us. I waited on him to speak first. My role had shifted from supplicant to badass minion of the big bad wolf, which was reality. Finally, he'd nodded to indicate that we could sit in his magnificent presence. We remained standing. So what's up, Coyote? Who's your friend? Sony, I'd like you to meet my boss, the Big Mac. Some people call him the Big Bad Wolf. He calls me Wolfling instead of Coyote. I grinned savagely. I knew that he would not comprehend that Wolfling was the diminutive for wolf, but he'd catch the implication. We're looking for one of our associates, a young lady of remarkable beauty. I left the description of Sorsha to his imagination, knowing that while limited, he could envision those who suffered at his hands or whom he'd like to. Best not go there. I'd only get furious. Besides, if he had captured her or someone else had sold her to him, he'd know who I meant. I was surprised when he pursed his lips and looked gravely at me over the rim of his snakeskin on his glasses. Some dudes brought her by here, tried to sell her to me. I told them I didn't want no part of it. Chicks like that don't belong here, and somebody would notice. I told them to take her over to Serpentina's bunch. He's like Jaguar. He likes to buy women's. I nodded and pretended that I believed him. Maybe I did. He was a dim bulb, but canny about crooked matters. I was afraid of that. I know you'd have treated her right no matter what. Wouldn't have hurt her if she mentioned me, since we're friends. I just let him off the hook, and he knew it. The poor cogs in his brain must be smoking with friction. He spoke with me, but he couldn't stop his eyes from flickering constantly to the behemoth standing next to me. Thing is, we need to know for sure if she's at Serpentina's. You got any word? I saw the beads of sweat on his forehead, and his eyes rolled a little behind the shaded lenses. Look, like I said, I tried to stay out of it. Serpentine might have bought her, I don't know the dude, but I hear he ain't stupid, so maybe not. All I know is I ain't got her. It was only yesterday. She might be anywheres. But I'm thinking not too far. Somebody wants her here in this hood for some reason. I felt like he knew more. But before I could press the matter, the dull thrum of bass that penetrated even in the insulated walls of the sanctum sanctorum of rancid perfidiousness that was Sony's office screeched to a halt, and a series of popping and ripping noise erupted out in the building, accompanied by screams of terror. I looked to the Mactimore. More lead slingers? He nodded at my left hand, and I took the hint. When we emerged from Sony's reeking office, I grasped my short sword, and to my astonishment, a series of concentric wooden boards emerged from a round piece of metal I clutched in my hand. I'd glamored it to look like a cell device. The wood was soon covered by something like leather, and numerous metallic studs that I later found formed the pattern of a wolf's gaping maw. We charged through the doors and leapt out into the fray. It was risky, but I let the Lord Wolf, with his larger shield, go first, so we were mostly covered. The band that he wore around his head had converted to a tall, hard helm. I wondered for a split second whether my leather one would do the same. I really needed to learn to concentrate during battle, I chided myself. People fled in every direction. Several attempted to hide from the violence that exploded all around them. A few lay and screamed or writhed in agony, and a few others lay sprawled unnaturally and utterly still. I dove behind the dubious cover of one of the big pleather VIP dance tables, my poor ears ringing from the assault by large speakers and heavy rounds. I hadn't brought along any long-range weapons. I wasn't sure who was firing at whom anyway. No point returning fire on potential allies. I scanned briefly and saw that Sony's crew was getting pounded. Guys in shiny white suits, uniformly carrying AK-style rifles, advanced through the club. They were organized and supported one another. Biggie S was down, but Papa Boo Boo still raged on, and Sony, whose courage I always found dubious, was blinking away with a shiny little pistol. One of his targets fell as I watched. Then it converted into a writhing, twitching form. Apparently it had possessed a natural glamour and life. In death it reminded me of the golden Lamiagic, only the scales were white and it was smaller. The attacker was Fae and clearly associated with Serpentine. I looked for the Mactimore and found him in the next VIP booth. We gave each other a nod and sprang into action. I rolled forward and thrust the sword upward into the belly of one of Serpentine's snake dudes. I withdrew the blade to a spurt of ichor and swept it into the lower leg of the next soldier to approach. He fell at my feet, and I finished him with a quick thrust to the throat. Grandpa had already taken out 4 of his short spear, and the shield smashed into bodies and broke bones in a satisfying manner. I recalled my training. Shields were for offense and interception more than static defense, especially the smaller varieties like mine. I know, slow-witted, but things happened so quickly that I didn't have time for self-flagellation. Instead, I smashed the rim of the shield into the face and ruined the white suit with the creature's own fluids as they spilled and dribbled down his chest. He had no time to lament his ruined nose and clothes, though. I crowned him with the pommel of my sword, and when he fell, I kicked him in the gut and used my foot to prod him away and up under a table. I wanted a prisoner to question, provided I survived. I waded back into the affray, and the white suit of the snake's troopers began to give way. Their retreat was as orderly as had been their attack, and there weren't many left, so it was swift. The big bad wolf and I let them flee. Sony's crew had taken some heavy damage. There were a few civilian casualties. A couple of the girls had been shot, but I saw no mostly naked corpses, which was a relief. Maybe it shouldn't matter, but somehow dead, innocent dancers seem more horrid to me than dead, innocent goons and perverts. At any rate, Sony had survived, and Papa Boo-Boo, while wounded, managed to limp and lumber to his boss's side, seized hold of my prisoner and dragged him out into the still flashing and colorful lights. The reflected spots of white light from the disco ball roved across his features. The place was eerily silent, or I was deaf from the thunder of firearms and bass at high volume. I kicked him awake by finding a tender spot and rendering mild pressure with the toes and heels of my boots. He eventually roused with hisses like a steam kettle. I hovered the blade, aimed at his right eye a few feet from him. "Why are you attacking here?" He glared, no more than I expected, but then he looked past me, and his eyes grew wide in terror. "Lord Wolf," he stammered, "I am but a soldier. I do as my master bids." He dropped his eyes in clear deference. The Mactir Moor stepped forward. "You will answer the questions from my grandson as though they were mine. If you speak truly, we will take an eye and send you back to the other world. You will not be able to return to this world, and will be blind in that eye for the rest of your life. Yet you will count yourself grateful." He growled out the last part in a way that made the hairs on my neck raise. It had an even stronger effect on the prisoner. "Mercy, Lord, I will do as you order. It was an ambush. Our master knew you would come here to find the girl. I do not know how he knew we did not take her here in the first place." He had anticipated my questions, which meant he likely knew even more. He had been well briefed, and now he perhaps wished for more mercy, but I was all out of it. "You say that your master didn't take her. Who did? Where is she?" His eyes shifted to me, and he hesitated, perhaps not quite feeling the fear he did for the elder wolf. But one twitch of the eye at that stalwart, and he hung his head. "I don't know which one, but I have heard a great lady. Master only wants to take you out because you might interfere with his plans for this part of Mundania. We were not told where she was, only that she might be bait for our own plans." I looked towards my grandfather. "Anything else, Lord?" He shook his head, and I quickly thrust my blade and pricked the reptilian prick in his eye. He screeched appropriately and shrank in on himself, once more hissing. I walked away to let him scramble to his feet and make his way to the nearest portal. I was sure that there was one in the vicinity, likely the same that the Lamia had used to murder Mercedes. My hearing had started to return. It seemed I healed more rapidly these days. Maybe spending time in the other world had some healthy side effects. I could hear sirens in the distance. Grandfather, perhaps it's time to go back and retrieve our friends. The big man looked at me and grinned. It's okay. The first to arrive will be an ally, and the others will be rerouted to other places since she is a supervisor. Somehow I knew which supervisor he meant. My old friend with the beaky nose, Lieutenant Falk. Shortly before she arrived, another being walked into our club from the side entrance. Skittle. I had rarely set eyes on the gang leader of the smallest but most efficient gang in the hood. Now with my fancy headgear, I could see him as he truly was. He still looked like a fit young man I remembered, but the faint outline of his street clothes no longer obscured the magnificent leopard headdress and mantle that adorned him and the large ostrich plume that waved above it to proclaim him a chieftain of his clan. I thought it odd the first time I'd encountered him that someone so obviously athletic would carry a walking stick. However, it was now revealed as a spear with an elaborate but deadly-looking tip. He looked at the Mac Moore and nodded respectfully in greeting. Lord Wolf, Tyree, he said simply. Grandfather returned the gesture. Lord Leopard, Shabil, it's been too long since you have visited Otherworld. We've missed you at our table. Skittle, now revealed to have much more dignified handle, Shabil, smiled. Perhaps you should come to this side more often, my friend. Many things are happening that will affect us all, as they have so often. Tyree grunted. Perhaps. I believe you've met my grandson. We've been calling him Wolfling. I don't think that the coyote would want him to continue to use his name as a cognomen. One never knows with him, though. He might laugh. He might snarl. Shabil took in the scene. It seems that one of our antagonists has decided to take over this little slice of Mundania. Since I have interest here at Well, I feel I must intercede, since he has attacked our mutual friend. He indicated Sony, who sat in a chair next to Biggie X's corpse. Then we may once more fight, side by side. I couldn't hold it any longer. Fae's standards of courtesy are not. So, Lord Leopard, do you by any chance know the whereabouts of my lady? He looked at me patiently, an elder who appeared as youthful as did my grandfather, looking upon a precocious child. Of course. Why do you think I'm here? I would have brought her, but the sellers wanted her to go either to Sony or Serpentine to cause the most conflict and confusion. However, I know who they are. It was my turn to wait patiently. I forced myself to clamp down any stupid retorts or frustrated sides and teeth grinding. Presently, Shabil gave a brief nod of approval. Apparently, he approved of my ability to adjust to the reality that he knew something I wanted to know, and that I'd have to wait until he was good and ready to deliver it. It's not Serpentine or his affiliates, at least not the direct ones. She is guarded by a griffin, and in the care of no less than the witch, Sophronia, and of course the great lady she serves. Your lady must be valuable to have attracted the attention of such powerful beings. He looked up at the Mac Moore with what I interpreted as a little caution when he stated the names of the witch. Grandfather nodded. I feared as much. My wife will do anything to torment me. My blood seethes but does not yet boil. My reason is intact. We have more to discuss before we act. I was the only one with no clue, so I just rolled with it. So where might we find this Stregonon Grandma Witch and her pet griffin? Shabil answered Tyree rather than me, his brat of a grandson. Where else would we find a griffin but the tallest building? I'm just glad it's not a dragon. I wasn't sure whether he was serious about the dragon, but I decided that I was glad we would have to face this one as well. I just couldn't be part of a story about rescuing a damsel from a dragon. Too cliché. Griffins were pretty dowdy guardians, though, from what I'd read. And my grandma the witch sounded like a challenge. Plus, she was my grandmother. I hoped that we wouldn't have to meet her great lady, but I needed Grandpa Wolf to do some splainin'. I was relieved that I'd have two such renowned warrior chieftains with me. Then Grandfather looked at me. Well, Wolfling, she's your woman. How do you want to go about this? Fubar, I griped internally. Snafu. Figured he just wanted me to come up with something. I was saved, however, by the realities of the moment and the arrival of the police. Lieutenant Falk stalked into the club, sharp eyes flitting from corpse to lesser casualties, to still living potential threats, and finally to the Fae. My lords, quite a mess for me and mine, but it will be blended into the background of other incidents before the sun rises. She looked down her great beak at me, and for the first time I saw. It truly was a beak, at least the top part, though her chin was human enough. That feathery hair of hers consisted of actual feathers. She was Then the connection formed. Falcon woman. I had to suppress sardonic laughter. No wonder she always appeared so superior in her demeanor. Raptors tend to have that sharp glance and judgmental glare in their eyes, always looking down regardless of the height of the subject of their scrutiny. Good evening, Lieutenant Falk. I managed to contain the laughter into a friendly smile. She did not return it, though I finally realized that she likely couldn't. She had no means to physically smile. She nodded and I continued. We will be conducting an operation at the Fulshire Tower tonight. I hope that attention may be focused elsewhere. I tried to be as polite as possible. We needed her more than I liked, so I might as well use my charms. The ones that, so far, had failed to gain anything positive from this one. I promise, I won't steal anything or set any fires. My smile morphed briefly into a smirk, which she either failed to note or ignored. We can take care of it. We will be busy tonight. I must get the current situation in hand. I had to let others handle the Centennial Park beheading case, a media festival that had attracted the attentions of my superiors. They will be busy for some time, and no one in this area has called in the firefight that resulted in this bloodbath. I believe that the mortal who runs this establishment will need attention shortly. Shall I ensure that he believes that he is beholden to you three for his salvation and protection from the Popo? I still didn't trust her, and I was sure she felt the same way about me. Yet we made the best of it, being allies and all. Yes, please, Lieutenant. I'll have a quick word with Sony before we go. Perhaps you might want to hear so our stories are consistent. With that, I approached Sony, who rose, a bit unsteadily, though more from shock and aging joints than any apparent wounds. Sony, you see that my new boss and I can handle things. Looks like you owe Skittle as well. Sorry about Biggie S, but he did his job to the last. Best take care of Papa Boo Boo. He's going to need some 911 action. We have to go finish some work of our own. Lieutenant Falk here will help you with cleanup. She knows nobody here wants uniformed attention. Once we take care of our own business, we'll help you with Serpendine's bunch. Their trap was sprung and they lost too many troops in springing it. They won't be back before we are. I detested so much about the man, but he had on occasion been good to me and to others. Take care, Sony. See you soon. We have been estranged for a couple of centuries. She chose to align with dark powers. Since we are in a constant struggle, it wouldn't do for us to be too far into one another's counsels. She's never forgiven me for taking your father into my service. When he chose sides and, of all people, married your mother, it put Sophronia in a bad place. The Mac Tyrmor had maintained an introspective look as he explained. Now he gave me an even stare as we paced towards downtown. Skittle Shabil followed in an East African-style war cart, drawn by 4 big leopards. His driver was none other than the young fellow who had taken Elle's place on the lookout. I wondered briefly whether Elle had been the driver before he was killed. The war cart and team were glamored to look like a big SUV in which Skittle normally rode, but it had a mundaneous stereo. Shabil loved music, especially Motown. He didn't blast it, he instead played it at just above normal and absorbed the strains of Percy Sledge as he belted out, "When a man loves a woman." Apropos, I thought. The passions and stresses of romance blended perfectly, so that one could hardly tell whether the singer wailed in pain or groaned with ecstasy. Percy had obviously been hopelessly in love at some point. Maybe Shabil as well. "I don't think that your grandmother wishes to harm you," the Mac Tyrmor continued. "She's likely just wants a word and will try to convince you to commit to her mistress or whomever they serve in turn." He rumbled. "It is, of course, up to you." I returned his gaze. "So why not just approach me and speak? That's pretty much what you did. After your servant drugged me into unconsciousness." I raised my hand to prevent him from, metaphorically at least, biting off my head. I know I failed to be cautious, and it was a well-taught lesson in true Fae fashion. So far you haven't tried to sell me on one side or the other, just shown me what I've needed to see. Does she not realize by hurting or even threatening my Sorsha that she is unlikely to ever gain my support or cooperation? He shrugged. "It's how that side operates. They prefer force or threats of force to reasoned persuasion. The philosophy is that once you are aligned, you will get to have others to bully, while you live in fear of consequences should you fail. The bullying allows one to relieve the stress of being bullied. It's a vicious cycle and subverts free will, the essence of being Fae." I thought about it and decided that the system for dark Fae wasn't unlike the government types in the mortal realm. Machiavelli had spoken particularly mockingly and partially in earnest about various uses of fear and whether it was preferable to inspire love or fear in those one ruled. It seemed to me that, as usual, with free-thinking beings, regardless of realm, that the answer was never to cut and dried as philosophers dreamed. "If you two are on opposing sides, how did you end up married to her?" It had taken a while, but I had finally made it to the obvious question. None too soon, as we had just passed the first of the taller buildings that signified we'd arrived at the primary downtown region. He smiled, clearly with fond memories. You had to look upon her in those days. How lovely and fierce she was, strong as steel and as sweet as the honey that matched her flowing locks." He shook himself, but went on in the enchanted tone he'd assumed. "I was love-struck before I knew what hit me. At first I thought it a spell and tried to fight it. I was in company of our chief and his delegation at the High Court of Powers of Light. The Dark Powers were in attendance. Regardless of whether we are at peace or war, the High Courts of Light and Dark meet twice per year. Once, at each High Court in turn. The official proceedings were done and there was a great ball. The dancers parted for just a moment, and there she was. She stood next to her mistress, the one she serves even now. Our eyes met and we both understood that we were doomed. Always to love one another, yet always eventually to strive. He finally came out of it. She is very dangerous. That is what you need to know for the moment. She will do her best to persuade you. She may even try a spell or three. It would be best if you choose your side beforehand, but I will not push you. You are of both light and dark heritage on both sides of your family, as are most all Fae. He left me no time to ponder that bombshell. Since we were very close to our destination, I looked at my grandfather and then back at Shabil. So, it's just us? No war bands? He frowned at me. We assumed that you had a plan to approach with only a small group. This is your quest, as I have said. It's late in the game to stop and gather a large force. I choked back a snotty reply, and after one extra large gulp of air, managed to stop gasping like a fish on a bank. Fair enough, I ground through my teeth. We are a powerful team. Maybe you and Lord Leopard can hold off the Griffin while I deal with Grandmother and free Sorsha. I'd offer more of a plan, but who knows how they will have things arranged. I've never been inside this building. It's a private company. I just recall hearing in school that they had wanted to build it on the mound. I indicated a rise of land beyond and to the west of Fulshire Tower. However, the other company that eventually got the land won in court by offering the organically friendly structure you now see, or would if there was sufficient light. The city management loved the idea of the ultra-modern Fulshire Tower juxtaposed with the plant-covered, as much garden as building, the mound complex. I had to cut off further architectural speculations. We have arrived, my lords. Shall we park on the street or use the garage? I looked at my two more experienced companions. Shabil smiled. I would like to start with the garage. It is bound in the earth element and is a strong place for beings such as we to begin. If we can find a portal, perhaps we can go around some of the obstacles and challenges I'm sure that the dear lady has placed for us between here and the rooftop. The big bad wolf simply nodded. Agreed. Shortcuts can be perilous, but it sounds like the long path might be worse. I encouraged MB ahead, and he pranced down into the first level of the garage. I think he was nervous and just showing off to cover it. He hadn't smiled much since we'd left Sony's place and hadn't laughed once. I patted his neck encouragingly. Time to earn our oats, my friend. He whickered in feigned mirth. True bravery, I thought. Frightened, but going ahead anyway. Good show, noble steed, I thought, in genuine affection for my equine friend. From the street, the garage looked inviting, a gleam of artificial light emanating from the ground-level lot. When we turned downward towards G1, however, we descended into darkness. I activated the moon pommel on my short sword, the tip of the spears of my two lead companions glowing with similar light. It made us a target, but dispelled the Urbesian gloom that was practically a living entity that swarmed and closed around us. Just ahead, as the pathway turned left and downward to the next level, a golden glow suffused the air directly ahead. It looked like a bunch of lightning bugs, drifting in globular pattern. I raised my hand to swat at them when we got close enough. But Grandpa Wolf called out to me, "Rob, let them be. Fae come in all sizes, and these are the smallest variety, and solidly aligned with light Fae." He shifted focus to the hovering, swarming entities. "Greeting, wayfinders. We poor blind travelers seek to find our way aloft, but find that we must first plunge into the earth. Will you guide us in some way for some distance?" For the first time in my life, I heard what I'd call tinkling laughter. Numerous tiny voices joined in to make a sound near the normal conversational volume for standard-sized folk, but very high-pitched like tiny bells. I peered at the swarm and tried to pick out some individuals. Each being was about an inch high or so, with large eyes and big front teeth that made them appear as though they constantly smiled. Their wings were something like a butterfly or moth, but looked more durable. The glow emanated from bulbs at the end of stalks that grew from the center of their wings where they attached to their shoulders. Their hair tended to be long and wispy for the females and spiky for the males. At least, I think that was a distinction of the two sexes. Their body shapes were pretty close to human standard, just on tiny scale, and their toes and fingers were pretty long in proportion to their arms and legs, probably for grasping when they weren't flying. They spoke in concert much as they laughed. It made their musical voices quiver a little. In other circumstances, by myself, in a dark forest, it would have been spooky.
"Greetings, traveler, and welcome to the dwelling. We are indeed here to guide, at least for a portion of your way. We will take you to the upward path that is guarded, but the most difficult. Stay on the road and follow us."
I had thought of the building as a business center, but apparently it was a dwelling as well. Fortunately, these occupants had invited us, so I was safe from my geas. I needed to be more careful of those things. The swarm led us downward through the passage from G1 down to G2. The parking spaces remained in the dark, but the path that we followed remained in the light, much like when the wild hunt pursued me. I wondered briefly whether these allies would lead us to doom or salvation, but ultimately I trusted my mentors, the big ones. There were definitely objects, perhaps living, in the Stygian bowels of the garages. Hints of horns and fangs, gleams and glows of eyes, yet they merely seethed and kept outside the circle of light, cast by the wee fae who swarmed about us in a protective circle. At last we arrived in front of what was normally a freight elevator. Large as it was, it still would not have contained our entire party had it not also been a type of portal. It was on level G3, which was marked with signs that proclaimed "Employees only beyond this point," in forbidding red letters on yellow backgrounds. The same message was printed across the metal drop bar gate that prevented vehicle traffic, but lifted quietly out of the way for our contingents to pass. The quivering tinkles spoke in unison once again.
"This is your best path upward. It won't take you all the way at first. Those above will sense your approach and be warned by their minions. You have a good start. We wish you well, and are honored to have played a part in your quest. The Lady Sorsha is quite remarkable."
I wondered what damage mortals might do these lovely beings with something like drones. It would be an interesting battle between aeronauts, but it made me sad to think of tiny, lifeless bodies strewn. "Sorsha, have you seen Lady Sorsha?" My voice must have contained the plaintiveness I felt, since they answered,
"Of course. This place is adjacent to our dwelling. We met her when she arrived and have kept her company. You are a most fortunate being."
With a chorus of tinkling bell, laughter, they sped away back up the tunnel. As the door closed, and the lights of the wee folk disappeared behind, there was a general stampede of dark beings towards our coach. They did not make it, but the car rang with their assault, and the clamor and shaking made the already perilous ascent seem doomed before it had gotten underway. As the indicator light buttons of various floors above the parking level changed and displayed our rise, the shouts, screams, and other calls of frustration faded. There were 74 floors in addition to 2 level penthouse floors on top and 3 parking levels, 79 altogether. We're in for a long trip, I thought, as the car ascended smoothly and swiftly. Naturally, the Murphy and his law rode with us, and it was not a long trip. We shuddered to a halt at floor 33. I noted that my companions tightened their grip on their weapons, and each raised his shield just a bit. So I did the same. I kept hold of the longsword, even though we were indoors. I figured that since we could fit 2 chariots and a large warhorse in a freight elevator car, we were unlikely to run out of the room once we exited the confines. Besides, the 2 more experienced warriors had kept long weapons. There was no ding. The doors did not automatically open. We just started for an uncomfortable moment. I felt that any moment we might plunge downward, but we just sat, listening to the metallic popping and creaking that might accompany any elevator halted mid-rise and scare the crap out of acrophobes. Finally, I reached out with the sword tip and touched the seam between the sliding doors. I expected to have to pry or shove, but the doors immediately sprang open, and a wan gray light filled the space in front of the compartment and was swallowed by our own lights. Outside the doors stood a pack of slavering wolves. For a moment, I thought we might have found allies, but then I heard the deep rumble that emanated from my grandfather's chest. Dark wolves. Greer drove the chariot team forward, which forced MB and me to surge ahead. Not that I had encouraged him. Mighty Bike plowed through the fight on his own with a deep trumpeting bay. He was his own war trumpet. I heard the screams of leopards behind and the scrabbling scratches of their extended claws on the metal floor. We exited in a ferocious charge of all hands. Well, and claws and hooves and wheels. There were 9 of the large beasts in the lobby, or whatever space might be. Clearly, it resided between realms. Perhaps a vestibule? There was plenty of room to maneuver, and 3 enemies apiece to fight. So, of course, the pack divided differently than expected. 2 each attacked the chariots, and the other 5 charged me. I was fortunate that MB knew his business. I soon found that I was not nearly as adroit at riding as I thought. He had to concentrate on the fight and didn't have time to coddle his rider with a smooth gait. However, I managed to get in a nice, if I'm being honest, a lucky strike. No pun intended. Most people these days would not know that lucky strikes were once a popular style of ready-rolled cigarettes, popular in old movies and dime novels. The blade cleaved the skull of my initial attacker in twain. Unfortunately, I didn't have time for elation, since the second one had snapped its jaws shut on my shield and dragged it downward, for the third to be able to leap over the top. MB had done well. He'd overrun one opponent, and when he reared, he bopped the second in the snout with his front hooves. The blow elicited a satisfying crunch of bone and spray of blood. When my number 3 cleared the top of the shield, I acted purely on instinct and my old martial arts training. I delivered a right cross, and my fist and the pommel of my sword impacted the snarling visage of the left cheek and jowl. It went spinning down to the floor, but quickly shook itself and snapped at MB's rear flank. That was a mistake. Mighty was my bike, and he dished in the bugger's chest with a backward kick. I looked into the eyes of the creature that had now pulled my shield almost completely from my arm and had me sagging dangerously on my perch. I opened my left hand and let it drag the shield to the ground. The sudden release of resistance caught the thing by surprise, and just before MB swirled to face the last remaining imminent threat, I drove the tip of the sword into its eye. I found I was sweating and panting. MB pranced around a bit. I looked around desperately to check on my little warband. The chariot teams had finished their business and was already back in the elevator car. The two warriors and drivers pretended to look impatient, but they could not hold it for long and soon favored me with savage chuckles. "You'll find that too many of our folk joined the Dark Powers," the Mactier Moor, whose accent had thickened just enough to notice, informed me. "It's a hard thing to slay one's own, or those who should be with us. It's why we are less than a clan than we should be. Division in the pack, the powers. Either side are adept at turning individuals towards one pathway or another." Shabil nodded in agreement. "The same applies among the Leopard clan. We never know until we make eye contact which way a being has chosen." So quoth this raven. Oh boy, Michael, the deep low voice and putting Irish into it. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. There's one more part to this chapter, and Bear has assured me that there is much more to come. Very excited for that. Have a lovely Thursday, everyone. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.